we typed up a memo, and he put a memo together that he wanted all the DNA checked that were taken in that area, right, Center City type area, for the last 4 years, right, and to have it tested, okay? So,
welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Today we have a special guest with us, retired Philadelphia Police homicide detective, Chuck Boyle. Chuck, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
well, thank you guys, and always a pleasure to see you two. That's the truth. So,
Hi, Chuck. Good to see you. We go back so far, don't we? Remember when we first met?
yes, we did. We were store detectives together.
I'm not sure that position even exists anymore.
I
But that was a job that we had about maybe 12 to 15 people at the old Strawbridge and Clothier department store, full-time detectives, and
Yes, yeah,
and we chased some pretty bad guys through those stores.
yes, yeah, amen. You know, I guess today they wouldn't even let you do it, but I mean, I can still remember that. So,
Hey, Chuck, didn't you grab him trying to put on a pair of pants over another pair of pants? Didn't you grab
well,
Fitz?
we won't go into that. So.
And we won't talk about Ray trying to fit into the dress, but that's a whole other story too.
Not that there's anything wrong with that,
Right.
right?
No.
Right.
For what it's worth, guys, this may be an edit. I lost both your screens. Can you see me?
Yes.
I can see all three of you.
Yep.
I mean, I can see all three screens.
All right.
Thanks.
Something
Chuck.
about
You
your
had a little
internet.
concern there. You could see all three of us. I thought, holy cow, there's only two.
Right.
Well, so Chuck, then that was in 75 that I started at Strawbridge and Clothier. Again, a big old school department school downtown, a big old school department store in downtown Philadelphia. You came in maybe early 76.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
And we walked the floors together, chased some shoplifters, little things, big things, leather jackets, whatever. The old till tappers, people would come in, break into registers. But then you left a little bit before me. I left to become a police officer. But then eventually you wound up joining the Philly PD. What year was that?
I joined the Philly PD in 78. 1978.
And, through the police academy, what was your first district, your first assignment?
Where I grew up, the 14th district, Germantown. So I grew up in Germantown. In fact, we go back because you went to Cardinal Doherty, I went to Bishop McDevitt.
That's right.
Catholic League boys. And so I joined in 78. And my first assignment, I was in the 14th district, Germantown.
Okay. Well, we're going to come back to all of this with Chuck, but I know Ray and I and Chuck are going to invite you. We're going to talk a little bit about what happened in Maine last week. And Ray, why don't you introduce us to that matter, and we'll pick up a little Q&A here and throw some ideas out about what went right, but certainly a lot of what went wrong.
Well, last week there was a tragedy. And first off, I just want to send my condolences out to all the victims and the families of the victims. What happened up in Maine? It's something that I don't know, or I believe probably could have been prevented based upon some of the things that are coming out now, but it wasn't. And I want to get, before I get into some things, Jim, let me get your pinch on this, and I'll get on. And both Jim and I were both on Fox and Friends. I did the morning show, and Jim did the evening show with Laura Ingraham. And we gave some of our thoughts then, and then that very next morning, early that morning, he was found after we gave our spiel on there. But Jim, why don't you go ahead and tell me what your thoughts are on this?
Yeah, I think it was actually Friday night when they announced they found his body, and right after I went off the air around 7:45. And I was, my presentation was just, he could still be alive, and the police have to assume and FBI, everybody else was there. They have to assume he's still alive and going to put up a firefight. But it certainly could be that he could have taken himself out somewhere too. I said I thought without wearing a mask at the scene itself, and the two different, I think one was a bar, one was a bowling alley. He didn't wear a mask, and he didn't wear a ballistic vest, and that could have been a suicide mission right there. He could have thought he was going to be killed right at the first location. He didn't. No police showed up right away. No one had firearms. He just takes off, jumps in his car. Well, this is a bonus. I have a bonus shooting coming up. And I'm not trying to make light of this at all. I'm just trying to think of the voices in this guy's head. So he goes to the next location, the next venue, shoots that up. He still wasn't confronted. I'm not blaming anybody at this point. First responders, they're heading to the first scene to try to help, the dying and the wounded there. He goes to the second scene, shoots that up, takes off. Hey, this is bonus time. So no one knew what he was trying to do. It probably, he went in there with suicidal ideation at the same time combined with homicidal ideation, and that's never a good mix. No one likes to hear about suicide or that someone takes their own life for whatever reason. But boy, if you're going to do it, you really don't have to take anyone else out with you. And I mean, it doesn't get much more worse than that. So, and then next thing you know, he's on the lam. And I think he realized this was bonus time. And the question was, how well prepared was he to make this egress into the next stage of life? It may have been coincidental. It may have been kind of clever to take his car and leave it by a boat ramp. And back then, did it mean he had a second car or even his motorcycle he could take off, or did he in fact take off on a boat ramp, on a boat at that ramp? And you don't like to compliment these guys and all, and this may have been more coincidence or by chance, but in a way, the investigators then, all the fugitive hunters, had to kind of diffuse where they were looking for this guy, on land or on sea. There's plenty of islands up there. So it really made it a little more difficult for him in that regard. But so that's what I kind of tried to discuss on my hit on Laura's show on Friday night. Ray, I know you went on Friday morning, and Chuck, we're going to bring you in too. We'll get our news hits out of the way here, and then see and see where we can take it from that point.
First of all, Jim, these situations, based on my experience, having participated in numerous of them as the after action team, usually result in either suicide by the offender or he's usually killed by the police. And I think that that's what this individual expected when he went into these, but it didn't happen for whatever reason. And they found him in a recycling plant in a kind of out in the yard where he had worked. So he went to a place that he was familiar with. It's not, he went down to that boat ramp, and then there's a path that leads for the boat ramp up to that recycling plant. So he was in a place that he was comfortable with and he was familiar with. But the big point here is, to me, is the pre-behavior indicators that he exhibited prior to the shooting. There were numerous, and we're finding out now, there were numerous calls by the police to this man's house. And because they're a yellow flag state and not a red flag state, only the police can take those weapons from him to see if he was fine enough to be able to maintain the weapons. The family was concerned with him. The employer was concerned with him. Even the military was concerned with him. They all made notifications to the police, and the police just didn't. I don't know if they did their investigation, they did their due diligence, but they let this guy slip through the cracks. So it probably could have been prevented here. I really believe it could have been.
It seems the one person who may have done his job in Maine completely, and we'll wait till all the facts are in. But we never use their names on our podcast, by the way. But this Maine shooter, some point over the summer, went to a gun shop and tried to buy a silencer, and the owner of the store said, because he knew of the record check, there was some mental health history, and said, no, you're not getting a silencer. So, I mean, really, what legitimate reason is there? I'm a Second Amendment guy. I believe in that. But silencer part, except for very rare situations in the civilian world, I don't think that's needed there. Chuck, any insight on your part? You were obviously a police officer, homicide detective for years. You may have come across something like this in your career, but just any input at this point from what we know about this guy?
Well, what I think too was that, and like what you said early on when they were looking for this guy, it seems like the locations that he did these shootings were because of his ex-wife, his girlfriend, and the son, that these were places that meant something to him. So I'm just wondering, did they go right to her and say, listen, where would he go? Because it just seems like he was familiar with the bar, he was familiar with the bowling alley, he was familiar with the boat launch, because I think that's where they said he proposed to her down at the boat launch. And so right away you would start looking. And then when they were going through the divorce, the judge had put a stay away order. He was also supposed to turn his guns in. That the courts ruled that he had to take he had to turn his guns in. And I just think the whole world started, like when you guys are more familiar with these guys, the few that I've run across, it's like the world starts to close in on them, and I remember talking to you about our boy out in Colorado. He started the same way, like with the peeping Tom stuff and everything. Like the whole way up the line, this guy was showing stuff, like, writing these letters to the military and what he was going to do and everything else. And like you said, he just slipped through the cracks. But I think the investigation part, if they got to her, but it was too late then, as far as to stop him. But, the courts asked his firearms be taken, and all these places were some place that he felt he was, that were close to him in his mind.
Yeah.
The mind that was talking to him in different voices, unfortunately, which is never a good sign, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what's funny? And I wonder, it didn't start till about a year ago when he got some hearing aids. And then once he got these hearing aids, he started hearing these voices. I'm wondering if there's a connection. Sometimes you get these hearing aids, and I don't have them yet. I know a few people that do have them, but
What'd you say?
Well, like Jim, you start hearing things. But I'm thinking, do you pick up other people? You pick up other conversations or frequencies? Is that possible? I don't know, but that's a question for another day, I guess.
Just to kind of wrap this up here, and I always take a lot of notes when I'm doing these TV hits. And by the way, I did say the other night I managed to get in. Pete was in for Laura Ingraham, and he was asking a lot of questions, but I managed to get in that the shooter's pre-offense behavior may determine where they would find him at some point. And I gave a little list of internet searches and places he frequented, worked or lived, and of course materials and supplies he was buying. And here it turns out they did find them at his body at a store there, or at a business where he used to work. But just real quick here, I'm friendly with some psychologists. At least one of them worked for the LAPD. Malloy, Mohanty, Knoll, and Hoffman. And it was Chris Mohanty. And Ray, I think you've run across them over the years. Yeah. But they came out a few years ago, and I assigned this article to my students at Penn West when I'm teaching threat assessment. And it's for threat assessment, but how to look at some of these potentially violent offenders. And they came up with like a 5-point checklist. I think it's really interesting. And I think you'll see the shooter in Maine probably covered at least 4 of them. And the first one is pseudo commando. And that is, he assumes the appearance and behavior and a desire for revenge and obliteration of others. Camo pants, cutout gloves, weapons, items like that. Now, this guy was an Army reservist. You think he would have got his yayas out that way, but I still think we have this person also living that kind of lifestyle. Number 2 is warrior mentality. He's motivated by a psychological fantasy to kill unarmed civilians. Well, that's exactly what this guy did in 2 different locations. Number 3, close and often secret association with both practical and symbolic weapons and paraphernalia. Well, he's trying to get the silencer for some of his weaponry there, so no surprise in that regard. Number 4, seeks to be like or even surpass other historical or fictional type of these types of attacks. And who knows if that wasn't his primary objective. And lastly, he's seeing himself as an agent or soldier to advance a belief system or cause. Now, we don't know what that is yet with this guy, if he had a belief system or cause besides these voices in his head. So I throw those out there, and I just for us to discuss or maybe wrap this up. But if you're part of our audience listening to this, feel free to research that article. It's called Identity Concepts and Threat Assessment, and you may know someone like this. You may have a buddy, a coworker, whatever. And if he fits a few of these categories, call the police, get the authorities involved, and let's hope they would take it to the next level and get this guy the mandatory treatment and the weapons out of his possession and go from there. So,
Jim, that one thing, that fifth one you talked about, where can you say that one again? That fifth one, that last one you mentioned?
Yeah, sure. Seeing oneself as an agent or soldier to advance a belief system or cause.
All right. Here's the thing with him, and a lot of people thought initially he was a spree shooter because it was a high degree of anxiety ongoing, and he went from spot to spot. I didn't see it as that. I saw as though he was more mission oriented, that he was looking for something or someone, and that could have been, as Chuck said earlier, that could have been his ex-girlfriend, ex-wife that he proposed to there. Maybe she saw some of the irregularities with his behavior and said, whoa, I'm not gonna marry this guy. I'm breaking this off. And that just put him over the edge. That's a whammy to him. It just put him over the edge. And he said, hey, look, I got nothing to lose. I'm taking her out, and I'm going out with her. But he didn't find her because apparently, and I'll bet you, Chuck, that bowling alley and that restaurant bar were two of the places that they went to. It's not a big tip.
They did say that, and they said that he had proposed to her at the boat launch.
Yeah.
And then he had a son, and the courts, the judge had issued a stay away order. He had to stay away from her and the son, and that he had to turn his weapons in. And I think was he an instructor too? So, I mean, it was, they said he was like some kind of instructor, but this wasn't probably the first time that somebody saw it. It's like, the thing that you hear now, if you see, when you ride the trains or something, if you see something, say something. And people are always afraid that, like, oh, am I, I didn't want to say anything because I don't want to alarm people, but, but I mean, I'm sure the people that knew him well probably aren't surprised about what happened. I mean, to the degree that it happened, I'm sure they're surprised, but I'm sure they're not surprised about his outcome and stuff.
Yeah, but I don't think he was a firearms instructor. He might have been a self-proclaimed firearms instructor.
Right.
Because, the military said he was not an instructor with us.
Right.
So who is he instructing? Unless he's just self-proclaimed. You know what I mean?
So, yeah, exactly. That was so.
And that's the whole pseudo commando ideology that he may be possessing there. So
that's right.
So we can move on, but everyone out there, the next shooter is out there. Ray, we've done this before, and listening to us, listening to other shows, think twice, don't do it that way. But and the bottom line, I still want to see the Nashville manifesto from the Nashville shooting. And this guy wrote at least one suicide letter, if not more. I like to see what he's written. The public has a right to see this. Let us know what these people are thinking before they undertake these kind of actions. And it'll give us just a little bit more of a chance to either recognize them beforehand or get the hell out of Dodge when we know something's about to go down.
I agree. Well, let's get into you, Chuck. You're the reason why we're here today. And
that's right.
We're so happy to have you too, Chuck. I mean,
I'm happy to be with you two guys. That's for sure.
Well, we don't get someone like of your caliber too often, Chuck. And by all means, you were the best of the best, as far as I'm concerned. There wasn't many guys better than you. But the one question I have is,
hey Ray, he was taught very well as a store detective by his senior detective in Strawbridge and Clothier. That's where it all started.
Chuck, tell him, say, look, Jim, I forgot more than you'll ever know. Let him know that, Chuck.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But Chuck, walk us through your career. I mean, how did you get involved? Why did you want to become a cop? What attracted you to law enforcement? We all have our reasons.
So my parents were both born in Ireland, came over, they were immigrants, right? My mother came 42. My dad came 47. They got married here in 52. I was born in 53. Grew up like in an Irish Catholic neighborhood. It was Irish Catholic, Jewish, Italian neighborhood, and my dad was a waiter at a Linton's, which was like a diner open 24 hours. And the police used to come in, and they, on Sundays they would give my dad a ride home, and whatever. And I remember a couple incidences where the police were, inside a house or something. Everybody's outside. You're looking. It was always they knew something that you didn't know, and it was always piqued my interest. Like what's going on. So I guess I went to Temple, so city school. I wouldn't say I was the greatest student in the world. I actually went there to play ball and blew my knee out. So then I kind of like lost. But like when I joined the police department, it was like a duck takes the water. I just found something that I really loved, and I just I feel like in the end I did help people. It was just how like we were like when I joined the police department, it was no different than I was in high school with my buddies who were on the football team. We were all like a group, right? And we lived and died for each other, and it was like I hear this stuff that is I don't remember guys that were like that I wouldn't say everybody was great, but I don't remember guys that would, being like crazy or brutal or whatever. I think, most of the guys I work with were hardworking family guys, and we wanted to do a good job. And I went to the 14th district, my old neighborhood. And what was funny is like, if you went to chase somebody, I ran the same way they used to, they were running. So it made it a little bit easier. And I'd like to think that I was a good street cop. I spent about 5 years in uniform, and then I went to the burglary unit, and that was plain clothes. I was lucky enough then that I used to, one of my assignments was that I used to walk the ex-mayor and police commissioner, Frank Rizzo, around at night. And that was quite a treat to walk him around, hear his stories and stuff. And then in the late 80s, I took, in Philly, you have to take a test for detective. And it's just, it's multiple choice, 100 questions, but it's, it's based on books and your directives and everything else. And I was good enough that I passed and then made detective. And my first assignment was North Central Detectives, which was 17th and Montgomery. So it was, popular to Lehigh Avenue, 10th Street to the river, which, how would you say it? Not the, they classified it as that was the ghetto, right? And I remember saying that there were one savings and loan, no banks in that North Central division, no banks at all. And so there was a lot of shootings, robberies, and then that's how I ended up in homicide, because I had so many of these kind of jobs. I worked with an older squad. Whenever there was be a shooting, they used to go, let the kid go in. So I would run out, and through that, I ended up in homicide. And went to homicide, ended up with a partner, Jeff Pyree, and then we worked well together, and had some interesting cases. I think it was really the first big DNA case in Philadelphia, and they brought in a geographical profile, or they brought Jimmy in with where we had the meeting down at the church on Rittenhouse Square, so I mean it was a great career. And 2008, it was just time to go. It was it ran its course, and then after that I went to Penn, which was an interesting experience. Like I said, the only way I was getting to Penn was to work there. So,
Hey, Chuck, by chance, did you wind up ever at either move confrontation?
the second one, I was on it. The first one, believe it or not, I was in, just graduated from the police academy. And the second one, I was on the police department, but we were held at the district. But I mean, all of us remember that day. It was like,
Both days, actually.
yeah, both, yeah, Jimmy Ramp.
Yeah.
So
My good fireman friend took a shotgun pellets
Yeah.
to his neck, the first one. So just real quick, Move was a radical back to nature group, yet they chose to live in West Philadelphia.
right.
If they were in the middle of the woods somewhere, nobody would really have cared. But
Oh.
there were abuse against kids and theft and warrants wanted for them. So the first confrontation was 78, an officer killed. And the second one, 85, the bomb was dropped, the whole city block burned, and it was a very difficult time in Philadelphia both those times.
Both times. And the first move, just to give somebody a perspective, was almost like in the middle of Drexel's campus. It was a college campus. It's one of these old Victorian neighborhoods and everything else. And what they did was they put a loudspeaker out there, and they used to blare the bullhorn all night long, keeping the people up and everything else. And these were people that were actually supporters of, because if you remember that neighborhood, it was very liberal, university type atmosphere, Penn, Drexel, same neighborhood that Ira Einhorn came from, not far from
the unicorn.
Yeah. Not far from where I forget her name. Holly was found when they went in and they found her in the trunk and stuff, and then he split. When you think of all the people, his lawyer was Arlen Specter, who ended up becoming our senator.
Yeah.
When you look at all these things, you think to yourself, "Wow."
I gotta ask you about two things. You gotta put this rumor to bed. Either put it to bed for me or tell me it's true. I had an uncle who was down at Central Detectives, and I think he retired in like 1980 or 1979. And he told me that guys were on a burglary detail, and he was a detective down there. And they brought a guy in that was doing burglaries in and around that place, and around somewhere. He didn't say exactly where. And he said, but he was in the cell, and it was right around this time of year, and it was a big Halloween party. And he said, the first guy came in was Santa Claus. And he told him, he said, if you don't admit to the burglaries, you're not going to get any gifts for Christmas. And then he left. And then the next guy came in was a priest. And he said, confess, my son, confess. He says, confess your sins. He says, well, make sure you go to heaven, confess. And the guy says, no. So then the guy came in an Easter Bunny outfit and started hitting the guy with a carrot and said, confess. Well, he went up to court for his prelim, and he told the judge, he says, Your Honor, he said, they're harassing me. Santa Claus came in and tried to get me to confess to this. Then a priest came in, and then the Easter Bunny came in, and the judge sent him up to Byberry, for eval. Is that true?
You're putting Chuck on the spot here. And
Well,
Byberry was a mental institution in Philadelphia, by the way.
The bunny rabbit was told to retire.
And he's now roaming around the White House lawn, keeping our president in line.
That's
Yeah,
great.
the bunny rabbit was told to retire. So,
all right, good. I guess that's that there. The other thing I want to just talk before we get into the Center City Rapist thing is Gary Heidnick. Did you get a chance to dwell on that at all or play in that at all?
I did, but my partner, Jeff Pyrie, was one of the original detectives on the job.
Wow. I mean, and just so you know, Gary Heidnick was a serial killer that secreted some of his victims in his basement. Why don't you tell us about it, Chuck?
Well, Gary Heidnick, it was in I guess the 25th district, which is like just above Temple University
Right.
neighborhood, and he was, like the forgotten girls, the street. He would pick them up, and then he would chain them into the basement, and you know, and tortured them and everything else. It kept them locked up, and I believe it was one girl was able to get out. Went to the police. The police went to the house, and then they went down into the basement. They found the bodies, if where he had them chained up and everything else. And then the thing about it was, like, these kind of guys are not stupid. And what I mean by that is that, of course, they have plenty of problems, but he was an affluent investor. They made a big thing. Some of the detectives said they were going to ask him for financial advice because the guy was good at it, And if I'm not mistaken, he was the last guy in Pennsylvania to be put to death.
That's
and
correct.
He asked for it.
That's right. That's right.
But my partner told me, because he was on that job, he said it was what they called it first time was a house of horrors.
Yeah.
What was done to these girls and stuff like that. And then right after that, we had the other guy that was off of Columbia Avenue. He kept them up in the ceiling. Oh my gosh, what was his name? Bernard, or I can't think of his name now. But he was doing the same thing. Like, nobody reports. Maybe they left years ago. Nobody reports these girls missing or whatever. It's not unusual for them to move on. And Marty, come to me now. Marty, but I could actually look it up. Marty was kept them up in the ceiling, and I forget, somebody, there was a smell or something. They went up to check it, and that's when they found these bodies up there. And he was another serial killer, And the last thing, like, the bosses up top, if you bring up like serial killers or something like they panic, they don't like to hear that kind of stuff, because I guess it inflames the public. The public gets scared. Like, Jimmy would notice, and Ray, you noticed too. Sometimes they were scared to use the press. You know what I mean? Like, we got to keep everything tight to the vest, that we can't let stuff out. Where sometimes you say, listen, put a little bit out, because somebody might know something, and they'll pick up the phone and call and say, look, I don't know if this means anything, but
And Chuck, it may also protect some future victims if some information is put out that a rapist or a killer is striking in a certain geographic area. They could be a little more careful. I think most law enforcement agencies, well into the 2000s, have learned to use the media and social media, of course, in a little more of a savvy way than it did back in the day.
Back in the day, it was like, keep the cards close to the vest, and not give anything out. And I think sometimes it set back investigations instead of, bringing them forward. So,
Chuck, that guy's name was Harrison Frank Marty Graham.
Marty Graham, that's it. Marty Graham.
His real name is Harrison Frank, but he goes by Marty Graham.
Yeah, Marty Graham.
Yeah,
and I still remember that. I was in North Central when Marty Graham was around, and another guy just like Gary Heidnick that was doing the same thing. I mean, these poor girls that ran on the street and everything else, and they were becoming victims. But again, it's like, I have two daughters. If one of them didn't come home at night, I'd be in a panic and rushing. These girls around on the street, and nobody really seems to care. At times.
I know. Well, there was a case that brought us together. You guys called it the Center City Rapist, and it kind of brought all three of us together. Yeah. It brought all three of us together. How did you get involved in that, Chuck?
Well, I was in what they call Special Investigations, SIU, at the time. So what we did was we handled like jobs like the line squad, murder happens like when that job first happened, you know, a call's made to, you know, it's usually by radio. They call homicide. Say we have a job, you know, at such and such a location. Crime scene's been notified and everything else. Then we do what they call a run sheet. We fill everything out. And then they'll assign, the supervisors will assign, say like one detective's the assigned detective. He's what they call the up man. Okay. And then they might send 2 guys out to the scene, 2 guys to the hospital, 2 guys to, you know, hang back and talk to witnesses and whatever. But in that case, they had gone out and met police, a witness that lived up on the 2nd floor across from Shannon's apartment, and her brother. And they found a girl who went to Penn, named Shannon Schieber. I believe she was 23 at the time, in her apartment, and she had been strangled and sexually assaulted. So at that time, they did an investigation. It really didn't go anywhere at first. So they had put like a whole task force around Rittenhouse Square, the city, in that little area there, and trying to find what they could. And then what happened was it went for so long that nothing was moving. So they assigned it to my partner and I to take over the investigation. But to say what happened was, the neighbor the night before said that he heard her screaming, and he went to knock on the door, and there was no answer. The police were called. They came. Police were willing to knock the door down. That's the truth. There was always controversy about it. They wanted to kick the door in. But the neighbor said, look, I'm not really sure. I thought I heard something that could have come from outside. So they didn't. They left. The police did. And these 2 police officers, they were sued and everything else, and it was the wrong thing. They felt really bad about this, and they, you know, the press in that sense vilified them for it, like they should have kicked the door in. Yeah. What were they going to kick the door in? The neighbor wasn't willing to, you know, like, I'm not really sure, and everything else. So the next morning or the next day, the brother came to meet with her, and he was banging on the door, and the neighbor heard it. He came out and said, what's up? He says, have you seen Shannon? I've been looking for her. She was supposed to meet me. He's banging on the door. He says, oh my God, I heard screaming last night or something. And I called the police and everything. With that, the brother kicked in the door. They went inside. There she is on the bed, laying across the bed, on her stomach, and she was naked, and there was blood on the wall. It was a pretty horrible scene for the brother and everything else. And as it turns out, you know, she had been, you know, manually strangled and whatever, and sexually assaulted. There was semen found on her. The blood on the wall turned out to be, she struggled and bit him, or whoever bit the person. They must have flung their thing like that with the blood, and it went on the wall. We were able to get that. Now, the apartment was locked from the inside, but she lived up on the 2nd floor, and there was a tree outside, and there was like a little porch thing. And she had sliding glass door, and that's how he came up and went into the apartment. You know? And
Chuck, wasn't that tree, didn't that have barbed wire around that tree?
Yeah. And so that's why they think he just went over by the wall. It wasn't that far to get up. It was just good enough that he could get up and pull himself up on the up onto the landing and went in. And of course, that door, there was always a controversy: was the door slid open or not? And when he left, because we had talked to him about it, he told us the whole story about he heard the police at the door.
Well, hold on. When you say he, who do you mean? Just so we're clear.
Troy Graves.
When he was eventually arrested. We're getting ahead here, but that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But
That's okay.
yeah. And so at the time, they didn't have any of that, but they did have DNA. And at the time, the DNA markers said that that it was probably a black male because there's only three kinds of DNA. I think it's like, what is it? Caucasian, uh, Asian, and uh,
African American.
yeah, African American.
Or
So
African anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what they said was that the the parents came up the next day, and of course afterwards they said that there was things that were missing in her apartment, and they put a list together. So now they thought, oh, this is a burglary, okay? So and then the DNA said uh, that the person was African American through DNA, right? So they started to stop the burger, anybody that was arrested in that area for burglary and everything else. And then there was a big thing about doing the DNA, swabbing people. We had a list. I think we swabbed over 2,000 people in the end, and never found anybody in Philadelphia, of course, that matched that DNA.
Chuck, let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
The murder of and rape of Shannon Schieber, that was not the first one in the string of serial rapes, correct? It went back
Correct.
at least a number of months, if not a year. And were you involved in those early days, or just was that a different unit?
No, what happened was, so Shannon Schieber was murdered like May 7th of, I think, like 1998. Okay.
Mhm.
And we were assigned to it in September of that year, right? Of 98. And so we were going through, we typed up a memo, and he put a memo together that he wanted all the DNA checked that were taken in that area, right? Center City type area, for the last 4 years, right? And to have it tested, okay? So that was in December when we sent the memo in. December. We walk into work on a January, and our lieutenant says, upstairs, the commissioner wants you. At the time, the commissioner was John Timoney from New York, had come down, and he was our police commissioner. And here we found out that we had 4 matches of DNA on sexual assaults that happened in the city of Philadelphia that weren't carried as sexual assaults. They were carried as investigations of premise. So therefore, the DNA was never tested
Oh boy.
until
Chuck, what does that mean?
Well,
Investigation premise.
okay, so So a girl, I'll put you how these cases happen. One girl had been out drinking, and when she woke up, she was in a tub and everything else, and she had been sexually assaulted, but she doesn't remember like what happened and stuff. But there was semen there, so the special victims person took the swabs, did an investigation. The girl couldn't say anything. And then how did he get in? Your door's locked and everything else. Well, there was a small crack in her window. And I'm telling you, when I say small crack in her window, I meant that. And so they just thought could have been a boyfriend, could have been, whatever. And she's just reporting it now. So instead of carrying it as a sexual assault, they carried it as an investigation of premise. And that's how they were carried, 4 of them. Turned out to be 6 of them. Each one in this area of Rittenhouse Square, Pine Street. It was almost like you could put like a square around this neighborhood. And a lot of them, like the one girl had a cat in the window. They talk about that. And Shannon Schieber was the only one that was on a second floor. He's usually on the first floor that he went in. Shannon Schieber was the only one on the first floor. She was on the second floor, the only one that went up, and she's the only one that fought. Believe it or not, she was the only girl. We interviewed every one of those girls later, and in each case there was DNA. It matched right to the person that was involved in the Shannon Schieber job. The DNA matched, and at first it was like 2, then it was 4, then it was 6, and then that's how the press labeled it the Center City Rapist, because he, up until that point, he had done, or it was nothing but rapes, sexual assaults, and the act itself was, over in seconds, a premature ejaculation or whatever. But he would whisper things to them. I've been watching you, I don't want to hurt you and all this other stuff. Like it was almost like he was treating it like it was a date or something.
Well, let me
believe it or not, that's a certain type of category of rapists. Right. I know we discussed this back in the day. Go ahead, Ray.
But let me ask you this. Here you are 5 months after this homicide, or what they're calling what they believe is a burglary that turns into a homicide because there's things missing from the apartment. You get it 5 months later, about 5 months later, they bring you and Jeff in. So you and Jeff Pyre, you guys are in this, and Jeff says, we need to get the DNA samples from as many people as we can where sexual assault took place. So you get this, and now all of a sudden, you're not looking at 1, you're looking at 7. What's going through your mind and Jeff's mind at this point?
Oh, at this point now, we know that we have a serial rapist that is on the loose. And what happened was, so at the time, because Jeff had stopped one guy and he ended up filing a lawsuit against him, but we started interviewing each one of these girls individually. Interviewed the special victims detectives that talked to them, got all the case files and everything else. And what we came up with was that this person wasn't, quote, a black male. It was an Hispanic male, an Indian male, somebody, he was dark complected, could have been Italian or a dark complected male, very thin, soft spoken, basically told the girls that I've been watching you. I thought it was time we should meet. I mean, these poor girls laying there talking, and they had already, this is the sad part, they had already reported this to the police. So, like the one girl was up in New York. She lived up on a walk-up on the 4th floor. We went up to interview her to get and then we had a composite. And I remember they didn't want to put the composite out. Remember, Jimmy? Because you had to convince them about the composites to put out. They didn't want to put the composite out. And so, because all this stuff was kind of like new, DNA, like when you think about it, I think the first big case was the O.J. Simpson case. It wasn't that long before, after this happened. And at first we were just getting small markers. I mean, like today they could tell you, like breaking it down. Then I think it was 1 in 1,000, and and then each, the numbers were going up. So now we're not sure. We know one thing we're not looking for is like a black male burglar. We're looking for a sexual predator. And the way he went in, he went through the cracks in the bars, and I remember the one girl saying she felt him around the waist and he was very skinny, and she thought he was like Spanish or whatever. And we were kind of getting frustrated because now we put the composite out, we asked for tips, and we had a tip sheet, and every day we would go and take care of how many tips we could go, and people were calling up. It was kind of like, it was crazy. If I remember one lady called up on a guy that was her neighbor's son down the street, And because he didn't shovel her snow, she said he was the Center City Rapist. So we had to go down there, and it was in South Philly. It was in an Italian house. We knocked on the door. We told them who we were and what we were there for. The mother almost dropped dead, right? And they brought the kid down. He was like 18 years old. He had to be 6'7", about 285, 290. And we looked at each other and said, "Thank you, we're gone," right? And we walked outside, and Jeff said, "So we had taken his DNA." I said, "Jeff, if he fit through those cracks, we definitely don't have the right guy," you know? And that's what was happening. There was the one bartender that worked for George Perrier at the one restaurant. He was called 6 different times because where he was working at, when they put the composite out, he looked at it. He was real nice and stuff like that. Good looking guy. And he used to call up and say he was the Center City Rapist. And, they would hand us this tip and we'd go, we already had his DNA. So, we would go, no, it's not him. I remember boss come back, "Are you sure?" We go, "Listen, we have DNA on all these jobs. It doesn't match. It's not him." But what's funny is, I shouldn't say it's fun, but they weren't sure what that meant. You know what I mean? Because they didn't do it all the time. They go, "Well, what do you mean it doesn't match?" Well, it doesn't match. It's like a fingerprint. It's a very specific thing. If his DNA doesn't match what we're finding, we got the wrong guy. It's just there's no way to to do it any other way. And then like you get tips like we were thinking these rapes and sexual assaults took place like from May to October. Then they would go dormant, right? You wouldn't hear anything. So I remember we had a meeting like, when did the circus come to town? When did that sports teams come to town? When did this come to town? Like all these different things are going through our mind,
Sure.
And we're not sure what we're looking for, other than we have a composite. Then we get a second composite that's a little bit different from the last girl. And so now we have 2 composites that they eventually put out. They were kind of similar, but different with the hair and stuff like that. And then it went dead. Nothing. I mean, we used to walk around with the tips. Like if we saw somebody out that fit that description, like what we thought, we might watch them. If I remember one guy was sitting at a outside cafe and he was drinking a Heineken, and he got up and he looked good, like he looked like the composite and stuff, and he got up and he went to the bathroom, and we walked over, took his beer, we had gloves, put it in a paper bag, wrapped it up. He came out and he's like looking like, the hell's my beer go, right? And then we followed him home. And we knew what apartment he was in and everything else. We had to get his name. We submitted the DNA. It came back negative. Now, I'm sure this guy, if he's listening to this, or he's sort of probably saying, "Son of a gun, that's what happened to my beer that night."
You owe him a beer, Chuck.
I do. It was a Heineken, too. And then there were certain people that, one guy was at Topper Salon. And it's really, great, like how girls felt at that time. But the girls at this Topper Salon, they felt this guy was kind of being creepy. So they called up and we ran right over, right? And we see the guy, good looking guy in his 20s. And, we used to have this form with us, fill out your name that, you hereby submit to give us permission to take your DNA. And we'd have a swab there. They would chew it, spit it in the thing like that. We'd have all their information. They'd sign it. We'd sign it. and then we would submit it. And they would go, so with this one guy, and we should say this to all the ones that we did, that you don't have to sign it. You can tell us to get lost, but that doesn't mean you're not a suspect. You know, and which I always found funny. We used to laugh at that at the time because of the O.J. Simpson case. They used to call it a person of interest. You know, if you said that in a Philadelphia courtroom, the judge would throw you out. Person of interest, you mean the suspect, right? You know, yes, Your Honor, the suspect. So, but this one guy, we take him outside. We don't want to do it in front of girls because we don't want him to know that the girls are the ones that called up. We said, look, whatever we have information, it's that you fit the description of this. And he lived downtown and everything else. And we filled everything out, and he agreed to do the swab. And I remember him chewing it, and he goes, "Is this legal?" And he was a lawyer. I said, "You're a lawyer, you ought to know." Right? And he spit it out. It wasn't him. But I remember he was chewing, and he goes, because when we were talking to him, he goes, "I'm an attorney." And I go, I understand that, but we're just trying to, eliminate you. And when he was chewing, he goes, "Is this legal?" So, and it turns out it was, I mean, we weren't forcing anybody.
It was voluntary.
It was voluntary. And that's what I always laugh because people think we have to be so careful of, and you guys know this, you have to think like a defense attorney. What am I going to get asked? Because the last thing you want to do is mess up the case when you get the right person. Then, and watch that person walk out the door. And then the case just went dead. We never, nothing. It was not. And then it was 1999. It was Labor Day weekend. We were off. It was a Saturday. We get a call from our sergeant to say that there was a sexual assault down on by Graduate Hospital. A girl was in the second floor bedroom and she had been sexually assaulted. What do you think? So we went down there and, they held the scene. And the bars on this window was a big bars on the window that had all these screws into the concrete. All the screws were removed. The bars were taken off the window, left right there. And this person went in to the house, went up to the second floor bedroom, and sexually assaulted this girl. And she couldn't see. When he was done, he ejaculated into a pillowcase. He had tied her hands up and everything else. And he ejaculated in a pillowcase and left it on top of her. And he was gone. And we went down there that morning, and we knew right then and there without DNA and anything. I remember turning to Jeffrey and said, "Our boy's back." Now, we hadn't had a sexual assault since the Schieber job in May of 98, and now this is August of 99. And as it turned out, the DNA matched, right? And what was crazy was this was the girl's first day in Philadelphia.
Oh, geez.
And she was going to school, university here. She had just moved in and she was in the house that these four girls rented on North Dane Street. It was her first night and she spent it. The other girl was out working and she was in there by herself. And I remember saying, is there anybody else is anybody else home? This is the stuff that he was saying to her. Now, go ahead, Jimmy. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. This is important. But as our audience knows, even the worst of serial rapists and serial murder cases, they still are local crimes. They still are local state crimes, with some exception in national parks or politicians, whatever, FBI, other law enforcement. However, at some point, you reached out for Ray Carr, and Ray Carr reached out for me. Can you walk us through a little bit about how the FBI, even though it was Philadelphia PD jurisdiction, that was never going to change, how the FBI was brought into it, and what you recall our interactions being back then.
What I recall was that after we found out, when we had the first 4 jobs that that were linked to the Shannon Schieber job, the sexual assault, we knew we had a sexual predator. We weren't familiar with that, but we knew that there was somebody out there like that. So we knew that, we were talking to somebody, the FBI has profilers, they do this stuff. So we reached out to Ray to get his, the expertise on what do we need to do to have you guys help us figure out who this person is, or to get a profile of who we might be looking for. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, it's somebody would think it's a laborious process. Like, you have to fill a lot of stuff out, a lot of information and everything else. And what we did was we submitted our DNA to the, I believe we had the DNA, but all our reports and everything else had to go to the FBI. We weren't allowed to nitpick. If you guys were going to take a look at it, you had to look at all the file. And that's what we argued with some of our, I'm not going to say all our bosses, with a couple bosses that didn't want to release certain things. They wanted to be protective of Shannon Schieber and her family because the family was politically connected and stuff like that. And we said, no, if we're not turning over the whole file, they don't want us. They won't, because they have a job to do too. So, but it worked out in our favor,
I remember the first night coming up to homicide. I remember walking into the homicide unit, and in the waiting room was Mr. and Mrs. Schieber.
Yes.
And they said to me, you introduced me to them, and they said to me, Agent Carr, do you have everything you need in order to take a look at this? And I said, look, we're just getting involved. They just reached out to us. We're just coming up to talk about this and kind of go forward. But I told them, and I'll say it right now, that both you and Jeff were the 2 best that the department had to offer. And you guys were the best of the best there. And I let them know that. And that's true today. It'll be true tomorrow. It'll be true forever with that.
I always felt, I felt bad. Listen, I'm a father of daughters, so I can't begin to put myself in their shoes and stuff like that. And especially after they find out that the department had 6 sexual assaults that they listed as investigations of premise, which changed everything about how the Philadelphia Police Department handles sexual assaults, DNA. Just changed the whole thing. We had a great chief of detectives, Joe Maxwell, the best chief. Yeah, John Maxwell, the best chief you could ever have. As far as chief of detectives, was the best. And he gave us nothing but all the support he could on that job. And you guys were very instrumental. To set up those meetings. And I remember we took that whole file down to the profile unit. We had down in Quantico. And I remember in that room, there had to be 26 because somebody there told me it was the most they ever had of all the different, you guys, you can tell the audience all the different people that were in that room, from psychological to, and we did a presentation. And I remember one person saying, not to be a smart aleck, but so what are you guys actually looking for? Because usually what happens is you do the presentation, the next day you come back and they give you a thing about here's steps that you can take that you missed, which is no big, that's great. That's what we were looking for. Is there something we should have been doing? But I remember they said, what exactly are you looking for? And I said, look, really all we're looking for is the first 7 digits of his social security number and his last name. We'll take it from there. And they kind of chuckled. But because that's where we were at that point. But I
Right.
remember that the next day it wasn't ready because you guys it was more detailed, but we ended up getting that report sent to the Chief Maxwell, and it was detailed about, that the area, what you should be looking for and everything else. And a lot of it was dead right on point, when we finally ran across our boy, you know.
I'll never forget, Chuck, that after Shannon's homicide, we felt that, and I'm not trying to give any defense for the eventual killer, but that may have been a circumstantial, situational environment where he just had to strangle her right there because the police are right at the door. And I remember saying to you, because I was, of course, I was learning about serial rapists too from some of the senior profilers in our unit. And I said, you know what? Because this guy's a power reassurance rapist, he almost sees these like dates. I said, I'll bet you the next rape he commits, and I'm always careful how I word this, but the next rape he commits, it'll still be a rape, it'll still be a violent felony, but he's going to be the most of a gentleman that he ever was. And Chuck, you told me you interviewed that next rapist, I think, a year later or so? Like you said, that Labor Day. And you said, yeah, he raped me and he was really a bad guy, but he was giving me clues how to better, lock my windows and how to have, other ways to keep safe from being raped again. And so he was like as much of a gentleman rapist, and I hate that term, but as much of a gentleman rapist as one could be, he tried to be afterwards. And it was that case that really taught me, even though I was, I relayed that information to you, it taught me that these guys do have personality characteristics, and their MO and their signature MO may change a little bit, modus operandi, but their signature behavior really won't. And it shows that these guys, they have ingrained in their brain how they're going to work and succeed, especially the successful ones that go 4 to 6 to 10 serial offenses. And a lot of them think alike, and that's what helps us better project, and provide a profile to future cases. So I think everyone learned a lot from this particular case, including from you. And I was glad to be invited. By the way, I guess as a team we agreed, let's do a community meeting at a venue about these cases when everything was still hot and heavy. And we had that church in Rittenhouse Square.
Yes.
And I think about 500 to 700 people showed up.
Absolutely. Yes.
And there were a number of speakers there, and I was, one of them. And I know that I forget if it was Maxwell who was a speaker, but some Philly PD people. I think someone from the FBI Philadelphia office was there. And then I went up there and I presented the profile. And I said, let's release this thing. And I think we put most of everything out there, and that we thought would be, in fact, consistent with this actual rapist. I'll never forget one of the questions asked by one of the women, Agent Fitzgerald, thank you for coming here tonight. Let me ask you, if this man, I'll take all your precautions, lock windows, double lock doors, don't open doors for anyone, call the police right away. But if someone gets in my room and they're ready to rape me, what do I do? And the only response that came to me is do whatever it takes to physically survive.
Correct.
And other people have said that before, and I'm not saying I invented that, but she just kind of nodded her head. Okay, do what it takes to survive, to still live after the event is over. And no one denies how bad a rape is and how what it does to a psyche and a body, but to just get that. But if you're able to live afterwards, you've accomplished your survivalistic goal.
Right. And if you remember that this was an everyday thing in the press. Every day they talked about this Center City Rapist, and the girls were afraid to go out at night, if they went out. And I can't tell you how many calls, because we were out there at night. Girl would hear a knock on the door, or, like the breeze with, like some of those areas with the trees, it would hit their window. 3rd floor, call the police. Somebody's trying to break in. And everybody was there, Then we had that one on a Sunday night right above Boyd's, the clothing store.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right.
Remember that girl? And it turns out it wasn't a sexual assault. It wasn't the Center City Rapist. She had issues, that poor girl. But I mean, they took it so serious that they called everybody in. And if we got notified, we notified you guys because we were just looking for anything that would lead us to, to someone like, as I always say, when you start these investigations, it's like an open field and you just keep trying to narrow it till it ends up pointing to somebody. When you say that we have him or that person there. And in this case, we had no suspects. We had DNA is what we had. And we had a profile of what we might be looking for. And it's funny, afterwards, a lot of those things that you guys told us about was spot on.
Well, and one of them was, and I want to go to the next part of the story, but with all the publicity you just mentioned, you're right, almost day in and day out. I think someone in the media tried to call him the Spider-Man rapist because he was climbing up, and somehow we poo-pooed that, or you guys did. No, Center City Rapist, let's not give him a superhero moniker. No. But at some point, I remember, after the consultation we had in Quantico, with all the media going on, we said, this guy, he's not stupid. He's been successful so far. He's going to do something like join the military, take some time off, blow out of Philly for whatever reason, and everything goes dormant, as you say. And then I think at some point you get a phone call, a teletype. Tell us how that part of the story comes together.
And one point that you made was really big. That the last rape where the girl was just in town for that one day, which will come out later, but he talked to her like it was like his girlfriend. He was whispering in her ear, soft spoken and everything else. Just, I don't want to hurt you. And I mean, just exactly how you described it. So then what happened was at three of the detectives, we had a little squad together. Three of the detectives from Special Victims joined us. Okay. Carl Latour, Sergeant was Lieutenant Tommy McDevitt, and God, I can't think of her name now. She'll get mad at me.
Yeah, she was
Linda Pace. Yeah. God bless her. And so what happened was we decided to put out reach out to the all the departments in the country. Did you have any sexual assaults where this is what this is how it happens and everything else, and we have DNA if you have any. So somebody, one of the three saw this teletype about sexual assaults at Fort Collins, Colorado, and that they had DNA. They pick up the phone, they call out there, and they got a series of sexual assaults, and they have DNA. And it's girls that live alone, right? Person came in, at night through windows, sliding glass door, almost describing what our guy did. Okay. And there was a series of them. But they had DNA. So our group sent out the DNA to Fort Collins to be tested. Came back a hit. DNA matched their jobs out there. And I think they had at least 6. And Jimmy, you brought this up, and Ray, you said the same thing. Afterwards, so not to get ahead of ourselves, you said there were probably other jobs out there where if the girl survived it, didn't say anything, wasn't injured or wasn't hurt, they kept their mouth shut. We know of at least 4 that were never reported in the Philadelphia area, at least 4 that we know of.
Absolutely.
Those girls never came forward. They were just happy to be alive, right? For whatever reason, they didn't come forward. So we had a DNA match. So there was a meeting with the Fort Collins police, and what happened was we had a guy in Philadelphia, a Lieutenant Monahan, that worked in major crimes, and he said, "Look, I can put a program together. We can link people up by people that lived here and in Fort Collins, right? And and I can put parameters on it, like age and everything else." And it was agreed. And I forget how many names there were. There was,
I think about 300, Chuck.
yeah.
I think there's about 300
And
names.
the deal was they would anybody that was still out in Fort Collins, they would take care of. Anybody here in Philadelphia, we would take care of. So we started going around, like knocking on doors. Can we get your DNA and everything else? And everybody cooperated. Okay, and then Fort Collins. There was one name on that list that was from here in Philadelphia down there that caught investigators in Philly's eye, and it was Troy Graves. And they kept calling out to Fort Collins, "Did you get this guy? Have you gotten his DNA? Have you gotten his DNA?" Turns out the guy's in the military. He's working up at a nuclear base up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, but he lives in Fort Collins, which is, just a ride up to, like, I guess, going from Philadelphia to Harrisburg.
Right.
And unbeknownst to us, while in the military, he was broke in through a window and sexually assaulted a person on the military base. And now he's back home. And when they had all this assaults in Fort Collins, his next door neighbor kept calling the police saying, "I think you guys ought to take a look at this guy," right? And he fits that description. He goes out at night, and he wears this hat and everything else. And for whatever reason, they never ran across. Like they would go out, knock on the door, he wouldn't answer the door, so they left. And then on the one day, they were able to left a fingerprint. One of their crime scene people did a great job, but he found a fingerprint underneath a railing in the last job that he did out there. And sure enough, they got a match on the fingerprint. The problem was that he had never been arrested. Okay, so there's no reason for his DNA to be in a system. His fingerprints weren't in the system. He was in the military. In the military records, you're not going to get his DNA or whatever, right? Or his fingerprints. They decided to bring him in for questioning. And when they brought him in, they did his fingerprints. The fingerprint matched. And then that's when they got a search warrant for his DNA. They talked to his wife. He ended up getting married out there. He married a minister's daughter.
Mm.
And she said that he had trouble sleeping, so he would go out at night for walks, right? And of course, out on these walks, he always did his homework. That's one thing he did. These girls all lived alone. They usually didn't have dogs. And they, boyfriends didn't stay overnight and everything else. He took his time. It's scary, how he did it, because he was meticulous about, like I said, and we had talked about this. The sex act was meaningless almost, as far as for him. It was the stalking, the breaking in. The harder, the better. I think he got his satisfaction out of that. Sexual satisfaction out of how the tougher, the better. To get in, to get out, and and I don't think he wanted to get caught. It wasn't, at all. It's just that, he joined the military after that last. So he did the last rape knowing he was going in the military in August of '99 in Philly. And he was in the Air Force in September of '99 and did quite well. Went to Texas for training and stuff. They sent him to a nuclear air base, Wyoming. And like when we talked to the military guys, their investigators, they told us about the sexual assault that they'd been involved in on their base and stuff. And then we talked to the Fort Collins police, and he admitted to the jobs there. Once he was confronted with everything, the DNA and everything else, they sent it to us. And then we were able to go out there and interview him. I remember going to Jimmy and you guys asking, like, what questions should we ask? How should we approach this guy? To get him to talk, not to, and he did. He talked. He told us everything. And of course, when we first found out, we went to where he lived, his ex-girlfriend and the daughter. And when they were walking around, remember how they used to put the pictures, the wanted photo of the Center City Rapist, like in the banks and the storefronts?
Sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the girlfriend at the time and the daughter, not his daughter, but this girl's daughter, he was living with this girl. They're walking by the bank one day, they see the photo, and she goes, "Oh, Mommy, there's Troy."
Oh, boy.
And she never called the police. Never called the police. And that little girl took one look at that photo, knew it was Troy. And then how did he start out? Again, it was missed. After the investigation and stuff, we found a 48 where he was stopped in the other side of Broad Street. So he did everything. So say if you divide Broad Street and 14th Street's the dividing line, he did everything from the teens up, like 14, 15 up, right? It was his area. But he lived around 9th Street. And he got stopped by the police one night, gave his name and everything else. He was stopped for being a peeping Tom. A peeping Tom. That's how he started out. He used to peek in windows at girls and look at the girls and stuff.
Gateway sexual offenses. Yeah, we know that.
How much prior, Chuck, did he get that?
I would say a year.
A year prior to
maybe
that.
Not even a year before the first one. I don't even think it was a year, a couple of months. No. He was stopped. And we didn't find that 48 because of the way it was coded. So it wasn't coded investigation or premise. There was another way they coded that 48. But when we asked for all the jobs that anybody did a ped stop, which we called a ped stop is investigation of person, we asked for all those. It wasn't in there, right? And because that's how we used to go, like we would go out and say, "Oh, look, this guy got stopped here. He looks good. Let's go out and get him." And like for the longest time, everything fell in his favor and not ours.
You're right. You're right. That's what you're looking for, Chuck. Yeah. You're looking for offenders that have prior arrests or stops that are engaged in those type of peeping activities and things just like that. That's what you're looking for. That's why you called for those things.
Yeah. And when we talked to the girl that he lived with at the time and the daughter, but we talked to the girl. She told us, "Oh yeah, we lived down around 9th Street. We lived in an apartment. Troy had trouble sleeping. He used to take walks at night. And that's what he did. He would go out and stalk these girls. Now the last job, what do you hear? This is like, whew, just scares you. So the last one, right? A lot of our concentration was in around Rittenhouse Square. Turns out he worked at a bank on Rittenhouse Square, right? Right there on the north side of Rittenhouse Square is that bank he worked at. In fact, his photo was in that bank, like on the thing, and that's where the girl saw the photo. Said, "No, Mommy, there's Troy," right? So the last girl that came into Philadelphia, it was her first night in Philadelphia. She was going to college. One of her roommates that time was living in that house by herself all summer, and she was working at a restaurant on the Rittenhouse Square. Devin, I'll tell you the restaurant, Devin. And we noticed for a fact he used to follow her home at night, and watch her go into that house. And he would do it, I guess, night after night, figuring out, how am I going to get in? I don't know how. He must have bought power tools with him, because you had to see these screws were like this that he took out of this wall and went into the house. That's the one where, and then when he went in there, the girl that he ended up, this girl was a blonde-haired girl. Like, he had certain looks that he went for, usually brownish, blondish hair, a certain build and everything else. When he went in there, this girl was Asian. The girl, when he was following her home that night, he must have cut it off. She went to a friend's house and didn't go home. She was living alone. This girl was upstairs in the bedroom sleeping, knew nothing about any of this stuff. He breaks in. That's when he was saying, are we alone? Is there anybody else in the house? Because he got a little worried that there was somebody else there. And then when he ejaculated and put it in the pillowcase, could have taken the pillowcase with him. He had tied her hands, laid her on the bed, dropped that right on her back. And Jeff and I took that as a big FU to the Philadelphia Police Department, because he knew he was leaving town, right? And sure enough, and I remember asking him that, I said, that was a little gift for us, wasn't it? Because he disappeared, but he couldn't stop himself. If he had left and went to Fort Collins, joined the military, never did another thing, maybe we'd have never caught him. If his DNA is never taken, it wasn't like he was a junkie or whatever. Actually, he was very easy to talk to. That's the scary part. He used to write me letters. Remember, Jimmy, I told you? He wrote me letters from prison, and I used to respond to him. I would write back to him. But a 100% sexual predator. Oh.
The dumb ones get caught early on. They don't become serial. They get caught after their first or second offense, whatever it is. But we're going to wind up here in a few minutes, but I just want to, and thank you so much for your time and this detailed version of this very difficult time in Philadelphia and Fort Collins history. But from an interview's perspective, I'm sure you had a couple little girls at this point in time, and you're sitting across a desk. And I remember as a young cop, you just want to jump over and strangle these guys and pummel them, but of course you don't. And in a way, you almost have to kind of act like their buddy a little bit. And it's so much grains against your system, but you have to. I know there's a good cop, bad cop thing you can do, but I'm sure you had to almost sit, and it's almost like you're having a conversation with a buddy. But of course, that's not the case. You're trying to establish rapport, and you're trying to get information out of him. Did you find that tough with guys like him to keep up that demeanor?
I did. And I remember talking to both of you about this. Yeah. And you guys gave me this, like a tip going out to talk to him, because you want him to get to talk to you. And I remember you were saying, well, like, find out what he likes and what you do. I went out there with the cigarettes that he smoked, because we ended up talking to the lieutenant who ran the sheriff's office out there that had him housed. And he says, oh, he smokes these cigarettes. And he said something about tasty cakes or something. We brought tasty cakes with him. We took them out across the table. We were all outside smoking. At the time I smoked, my partner smoked, he smoked, we're outside smoking with him. Listen, Troy, we're not mad at you. Because at the end of the day, you want him to tell you everything.
Right.
Everything, and he did, and it was, I found it easier to talk to him. Now, of course, he's not your friend, right. And what we did was, when we were out there, I always remember we were talking to him, his attorney, a public defender or whatever, they didn't want us to, of course, talk to him. So we said that, no problem. We come out of the room, and she was there, and she said, you can't talk to him. We said, okay, no problem. We said, but we're going to give our office a call, and we're going to get a extradition thing, and we're going to take him back to Philadelphia. And our DA, if you're not aware of it, is Lynn Abraham. And I remember saying this to her. She's personally going to stick the needle in his arm when it's his death sentence. Because if you're out for his own interest, you better think twice. She said, I didn't say you couldn't talk to him. You just can't talk to him now. So I got Charlie Gallagher, chief of homicide, on. There was an agreement made, and over 2 weeks, we flew back home. We went back 2 weeks later with the special victims people and ourselves, Jeff and I, and the DA's office, and took his statement for the Shannon Schieber murder, and they took the statements for all the sexual assaults. He confessed to all of them. And there were also, like I said, 4 others that we know happened, but were never reported, at least 4. That wasn't his first time at the rodeo.
No, you're right, Chuck.
All through that time, he was active. But he only went in the spring right up to the fall because these girls didn't have air conditioning stuff. They used to leave their windows cracked, and they all lived on the first floor, and they were all single and stuff. And that was just what he wanted. And he would track them down. He had a certain look, and he would follow them. And he took his time. Shannon Schieber was the only one that lived above the first floor and was the only one that fought him. The only one. Everybody else just, what you said, Jimmy. They stayed alive. They did what they needed to stay alive.
Let me ask you this, Chuck.
Go ahead.
One of the reasons that we had that community meeting was we thought that there might be a good chance that he may show up.
Exactly.
Trying to find out what we knew. Did he ever show up at that meeting at any time?
No.
He did not.
No, he was gone at that point. No, he wasn't gone at that point. It was right before the last war.
Did you ask him, Chuck?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
He knew what we were doing, and I think that's why he left that pillowcase for us.
Yeah.
On the way out the door is a little like, I'll see you around. I'm gone.
Chuck, I remember coming that night to that venue in Rittenhouse and parking outside, and there was a guy that looked just like him standing outside.
Remember that? Yes, I remember that exactly.
And I thought, bitch, that's him. And then I asked him a question. He took off down the stairs.
Yeah, I remember that. And if you remember when we were leaving that night, a girl came up to talk to us about it and thought that, she remembered something about a guy. And after that, the public was so much, especially the people that in that area that were so much more aware. And we were getting like tips and stuff like that, because they were legitimately, if your daughter was going to Penn or any of these schools, you had to be worried.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's a girl that graduated Duke University with 3 majors in 3 years. Went and it was accepted to an insurance program at the Wharton School that only 15 students are accepted every year. That's how brilliant this girl was.
I know.
You mean Shannon Schieber, the homicide victim?
Yeah, the homicide. Yes. The potential, it just breaks your heart. And then these other poor girls that report it, and nobody they don't get a very good job.
No.
And that's the truth. They went down with it, and their statistics stayed down. I remember they're trying to blame a poor captain in the 9th district. He said, he didn't control it. If they had been, quote, handled as that, they would have tested the DNA that linked the first 2 together. And then, there wouldn't have been 4, 6, 7, 8, But that's near here. What are you going to do? It's all different now.
Chuck, I'll never forget, there was a plea agreement between the Philly DA's office and the Fort Collins DA's office. And basically, he would do his prison time. I think he had consecutive sentences for the rapes he committed in Colorado. So he was basically never getting out of jail. But part of that, so he wouldn't have to go back to Pennsylvania where they had a death penalty. I don't think Colorado had a death penalty then.
No, they didn't.
But part of the plea agreement And I always remember asking you this, and you asked the DA involved, and that was for Graves to agree to a behavioral interview with the profilers. And that was going to be me and Ray flying out there, 6 months, a year after the case. And we thought, boy, I mean, you always wish these things never happened at all, but if they did, this guy could be a real treasure trove of behavioral information to just mine his brain about everything he's done, what was successful, how did he pick this victim, why did he not pick another victim, but true to form, he reneged on us, and I said,
Yes.
yeah, I know, I agreed to it, and my attorney, I think the DA contacted his attorney, whoever it was, at the end, and the bond, yeah, you can't make me talk. I ain't talking to those effing profilers. So we never did get a chance to do
And
our interviews with them.
What bothered me about that was the fact that when he got to prison, I think that was the time when he thought, like, I'll never be able to do this again. And I think he just felt so guilty about getting caught, not about what he did, but getting caught.
Right.
He didn't want to talk to anybody then, because now I'm in prison. I can't, his wife divorced him, the girl. She was gorgeous, by the way. The minister's daughter, she divorced him. Like his whole world came crashing down. And I think he just got pretty bitter. And he didn't go. I will say this, the prison he went to in Colorado, I wouldn't want to be in it, so. But I remember that, and at the time he was going, oh yeah, I'll talk to them. I have no problem. And then all of a sudden he changed like that, I just think it did that, the whole prison thing and getting caught and stuff just messed up, his psyche.
He became angry. He became angry.
Like, how dare they catch me,
Right, exactly.
Well, we still learned a lot on this case from a investigative perspective, Chuck, what you laid out, certainly from a behavioral perspective. We were glad to offer whatever we could. It was nice being back in my hometown. Again, I wish it was for some other reason, but to work with Philly PD, I grew up, a bunch of my buddies were Philly cops, meeting up with you after 20 years, where we didn't see each other and learning where we both were in life. That was certainly a beneficial part of it, despite it being a matter of a serial rape case. Ray, do you want to have any final comments or questions here of our guest, Chuck?
I want to thank Chuck Boyle for joining us and shedding light on an unbelievable career, Chuck.
Well,
as
thank
a homicide detective in the Philadelphia
thank you
Police
guys for everything you did for Jeff and I. And I have to say something else, if you don't mind. And it kind of shook me, but the more I look at it, I remember you guys, we were talking, and I think, Jimmy, you were up in New York with a serial rapist too,
yes.
at one point. I'm shocked that there are more of these guys out there than the public ever knows.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just so scary. Like when you read this, the green something killer, and these guys are out there, and it's just like, it's scary. It really is.
It is, Chuck. It is. It's so scary. You're right. You're so right.
DNA and CODIS has certainly helped link these rapes over the years, but human behavior hasn't changed. And there's that small, minuscule percentage of men who just feel for a power and control scenario. As you said, Chuck, it wasn't really about the sex act itself. That may have lasted less than a minute, but the break-in itself, the whole experience is really a sexual encounter for these types of people, these types of rapists. And they're still out there today. And they're getting away with it. And some of them are a little smarter. We don't have to get into how they're being smarter than leaving the evidence behind that their predecessors did in past crimes. But this show is about victims. This podcast is about victims, knowing your environment. So please, like I said earlier, to all the women out there, men too, for that matter, know your immediate surroundings. Don't answer the door for anyone. If they say they're police officers, make sure you see the actual police car outside. Don't fall for any of these tricks. That even if they're not Spider-Man like and can climb 2 or 3 stories to a side of a building, they have other ways of getting in to meet you. And of course, now online also is how they can set this whole thing up. So,
Sure.
so be precautious there. So again, thanks again, Chuck Boyle,
Thank you.
for joining us.
Before you take us home, Jim, I want to give a Chuck Boyle quote here that
Oh,
he said to me. He said, I was asking him, I said, well, what's your thoughts on this guy, Chuck? When we were first talking. And he said, I'll tell you what, Ray. He's an unbelievable burglar, but he's a shitty rapist because he leaves his calling card wherever he goes.
yeah.
And that was so true what you said. And by the way, Chuck, I'm going to a Halloween party tonight, and you'll never guess what I'm dressing as.
Oh boy.
An Easter bunny. An Easter bunny.
Oh my God, the Easter bunny. Don't carry that 6-foot carrot. All right. So,
And on that, we'll have pictures for you on the next Cold Red podcast of Ray in his rabbit uniform. But again, thanks, Chuck, for joining us. Be
the
sure,
best I ever
be sure
read.
to, well, we appreciate it. Keep listening to us, and all the fans out there. Subscribe to the Cold Red podcast. Follow us on all Cold Red podcast social media platforms and the coldredpodcast.com. We'll see you next week with not just another regular guest, but like tonight, we'll have a special guest. So stay safe and always be aware of your surroundings. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Chuck. Have a great night and happy Halloween, even if you hear this a week or so later.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Hey, if you could do one thing for us, now that that's out,